Welcome back to Coffee and Cartridges. Hope you're having a great day. Today I want to talk about the top 10 rifle manufacturers ever. Stay tuned. All right, this was pretty difficult. I really had a tough time deciding on this list. So let me say some ground rules here. This is a rifle manufacturer and seller. This is not a designer like John Browning or Paul Mauser, just themselves. So it's not a designer, it's not top 10 developers or designers, but it's the manufacturer. It's the one that marketed it and manufactured it. This is a historical list, so it's not just their current lineup on their website or what they're currently offering, but it's a historical compilation. And it also involves what they currently sell. This is only for rifles. So this is not a discussion on these particular brands or companies' lineup of shotguns or historical pistols that they made or any kind of handgun. It's only rifles. So anything with the rifling that could be a rimfire, it could be a centerfire, bolt action, pump, lever, doesn't matter. If it has rifling, it counts. Also going to tell you this was a very hard list, and you could probably change my mind pretty easily in the comments because I went back and forth quite a few times. There's going to be a lot of companies you don't hear me talk about, but I will probably mention them at the end as honorable mentions, and I'll explain why I didn't have them in the top 10. Okay, without any more caveats, number 10, Sako. Okay, Sako is a company from Finland. They have been around since 1921. They also own Tikka, so they are the ones that manufacture the Tikka rifles. Sako has always been known as a high-end rifle manufacturer for bolt-action rifles. Now, I don't claim to be an expert on any of these companies, so I'm sure there's a lot that I'm going to miss today or not talk about, but when I think of Sako, I think of high-end bolt-action rifles. This company's still around. In fact, they've got a lot of really new current stuff that's pretty cool, carbon fiber barrels and stocks and things like that. But some of their big ones, 1957, the Forester, 1961, the Finn Bear. From 59 to 74, they had the Finn Wolf, which was a lever rifle. Some of their notable ones is the Model 75, the Model 85, the M85, and then the S20. So when you think of Sako, you think of high-end, therefore expensive. You know, they're going to be in the thousands and not in the hundreds, and have been for a long time, but they've always been a quality firearm. A lot like Christensen today, that's kind of what Sako's been for a long time. Why are they only number 10? Maybe it's ignorance on my part. I just don't know of a ton of things that they've done, but everything that they've done has been high quality. Number 9, Weatherby. Weatherby came out in 1945. Weatherby's always been about the fastest cartridge in every caliber, starting with the 270 Weatherby and the 257, the 300, some of those early ones. Roy Weatherby's always been about the fastest. He kind of went his own way. He's like, I'm just going to make my own cartridges with my own cartridge design, with the double radius Venturi shoulder. Just kind of wanted to do his own thing and was not interested in like target shooting. He was interested in hunting and his bullets going fast, which is really cool. Developed a lot of cartridges. But as far as rifles, I only know really of one, and that's the Mark V. Now, there's also the Vanguard, and the Vanguard Action, if I'm understanding correctly, is developed by Howa over in Japan. The rifle's probably assembled by Weatherby somewhere, but the Mark V was, was an original design by Weatherby, and it's a phenomenal cartridge. Now, that doesn't mean they have one rifle. They have many iterations of the Mark V, and they're all different. So don't misunderstand me, and I'm not saying they don't have other types of rifles. They have a lot of iterations of the Mark V. But really, the Mark V and the Vanguard's all that I know of. So if I'm missing something, please correct me. I'm just ignorant. I just don't know a whole lot about it. They, I would say, have far less notable rifles than Sako, but why did I put them ahead of Sako? Because I think the Mark V has had such an awesome and bigger impact worldwide than any of the Sako rifles have. And the Mark V would be on that same level of price, historically speaking, as what a Sako was. Maybe slightly less than a Sako, but pretty well the same. And like I said, you can get a Mark V in anything. You want an African model, you want one that's more geared for short action versus long action. There's so many different ones. They're all good. It's a high quality firearm. A lot like the Sakos. It's a high quality rifle. I think of Sako as high end. I think of Weatherby as high end. But the Mark V, in my opinion, just had a much bigger impact than any of the Sakos did. And I could be wrong about that. And here's one last caveat. This is coming from an American perspective. I know there's a lot of rifle companies out there like Mauser and different ones. I just don't know much about them. So I could totally be missing things or be ignorant, but this is just as far as I know. But I would put Weatherby above Sako just because the Mark V is so much bigger of an impact. Number 8, Mauser. Now, this is not specifically Peter Mauser, because this is more of the manufacturer, but Peter and Wilhelm, or Peter, Paul, and Wilhelm started their own company. And they developed a lot of rifles for armies across the world. Here's just a few. 1871 Mauser for the Prussian army, 1887 for the Turkish army, the 1893 Mauser for the Spanish, 1894 for the Swedish, 1895 for the Chilean, 1896 for the Swedish, and then 1898 for the German army, or as we know today, the 98 Mauser. So all their designs from their own company, the Mauser company, they manufactured. So Peter Paul, his name is Peter Paul Mauser. Paul Mauser basically was the designer. Wilhelm was more of the manager of the company, but they worked together, and a lot of rifles in the late 19th century would have been of Mauser design all across the world. And then the 98 Mauser was kind of the magnum opus. It was kind of like, okay, you've reached something here. Like, this is an amazing rifle. So much so that everybody copied it, us included. The 1903 Springfield is basically a copy of the 1898 Mauser. And many countries and armies across the world just copied it. Sometimes we had to pay royalties. Other times countries around the world would want their own Mauser, so they would have some plant there close to Germany, maybe in Austria, whatever the case. Czechoslovakia make Mausers for them and get them sent out. But I'm just telling you, around World War I, it's not a far stretch to say 95% of the military rifles across the world were of a Mauser design. And then, of course, the Model 98 influenced so many of our rifles today. In one way or another, every bolt-action rifle has its heritage from the Mauser. So now Mauser still exists today. The company is still around. It's been bought and traded, and it's different. It's not the same people, of course. It's not the Mauser family that I know of. But nothing they're doing today, in my opinion, is really that noteworthy. They do have the M18, I think, that came out, which is pretty cool. And they've got some other ones. And you can still get a 98 Mauser. It's very expensive. But man, just for historical purposes, I've got to go Mauser, number 8. Number 7, FN, out of Belgium. So Fabrique Nationale, which is what FN stands for, they've had their hands in rifles, in the rifle industry, for over 100 years. They even had dealings with Mauser on certain things. It's often said that, and I think I've even said it, that FNN owns Winchester and Browning. Technically, that's not true. They're all owned by the Herstal Group out of Belgium. It's a holdings group that owns FN, Browning, and Winchester. And if you trace it back, the Herstal Group really is owned by a part of the Belgian government, really. It's what it boils down to. So the Belgian government basically owns them. It's more complicated than that, but basically that's the case. So Winchester, at one point kind of went out, and F&N decided we're going to start making the Model 70s again. So like the current Model 70s are made by FN. At one time they were made by their plant in South Carolina. Now I believe they're made in the Philippines. But those three companies, Browning, FN, and Winchester, are all kind of linked together. And it's cool if you think about it because John Browning worked for all three. Anyway, they have been around for a long time, been a player in the firearms industry for over 100 years, probably 150, 160 years. Now, what have they actually done? So a lot of their big stuff that they did, John Browning designed it early on, but they've come out with the FAL and the SCAR and several things. If you go to Wikipedia and you just look at FN patents and rifles, it's a long list. Them and one other company, Remington, the list of firearms they designed are amazing. How many different rifles that they designed. And a lot of them, going back to F to FN, just weren't that notable for the biggest part of the world. Maybe, I'm not 100% sure on this, but maybe not the most successful financially. But they have never stopped developing rifles. They've been involved in a lot of military manufacturing of rifles for a long time. But like I said, they had dealings with Mauser, Browning. Today they make the Model 70s for Winchester. I mean, they've just been around and have a huge presence in the firearms industry and have developed a ton of noteworthy and awesome rifles. Number 6, Savage. Savage came out in 1894. It seems like they had a friendly relationship with Winchester. Sometimes Winchester would come out with a cartridge like the .284 Winchester, and like nobody would chamber for it except for maybe Savage. Like that's been said a lot, where something that Winchester did, nobody else really picked up on it except for Savage. They would, they're kind of a friendly company. They wanted to work with other people. Been around a long time. Historically, they did have the Model 99 rifle was a big hit, and they had several back in the day. I never think of them as at the top tier. Other companies, I think, was tier 1. I think they were always kind of a tier 2 company, but they've definitely developed some cool stuff. I think they're this high on the list more for, yes, they have the longevity, been around since 1894. They've developed cool cartridges, but that's not what we're talking about today. We're talking about rifles. But I think they're just getting better. That's why they're so high on the list, is the company is just getting better and better and better. And their biggest rifle is the 110. Now there's the 111, there's the 112, there's the 10, which is kind of like the 110. There's the 11, which is like the 111, but very similar rifles. But what they're really known for is affordable. And today in 2022, I think they're doing better than they've ever done. I think. I mean, if you just go to Walmart and you're like, hey, do you have any 22s, kind of a cheaper end 22? There's like going to be 3 or 4 different types of Savage 22 you can buy. They have an A series and a B series of rimfire rifles. It's like Savage has their hands in everything. They've never, I don't think, been huge. Now, historically, they had some lever action, but they've never been huge into lever action. But just, they have the history, but yet they're kind of like Henry today. Like the current Henry has a ton of offerings and a lot of popularity. Savage has that. But the reason Savage is here and not Henry is because Savage also has the history. But just today, you know, they have their Axis and their 110, and they got so many affordable rifles. And they also chamber, and they've done this historically too, going back to the 284. Even today, they chamber in so many different things. I get so bored with, you know, new rifle comes out, and it's 6.5 Creedmoor, 6.5 PRC, and 308. That's boring, guys. I want something new. And there's nobody better. I would say Browning and Savage would be 1 and 2, and Savage being number 1. At just chambering in tons of different stuff. You want a 6.5 284, you can get it. Savage has it. So Savage overall has a long history, but even today, they're probably more relevant today than they've ever been. And they make very accurate rifles, you know. I don't think their quality control is the best, but their accuracy, they've seemed to figure that out. And affordability is their mantra. So I would call them number 6. It's so hard. Number 5, Browning. Now, the Browning company obviously goes back to John Browning and his brothers and their family. But in all honesty, half the life or existence of Browning, they just made guns for other companies. So like the original Browning was an 1885 high wall that Winchester bought. They just says, look, we want to buy the rights of this gun for you and produce it as the Winchester 1885. And he sold it. And for many years, that's what John Browning did. He just developed something and then he sold it to Winchester, Remington, Colt, F&N, whatever the case. And really it was after he died that the company kind of went off on, you know, kind of said, we're going to have our own in-house stuff. And really most of what is on the current lineup today was not really developed by John Browning. However, Browning, excluding the things that John Browning did, is an awesome company. I mean, you think of their A-bolt, you think of their X-bolt, you think of their BAR or their BLR. They got some 22s that are awesome. I mean, Browning's kind of like Ruger and Weatherby and Sako. You just know it's going to be quality. If Browning designs it, it's going to be quality. And years ago, you know, they're very tied closely to FN and to Belgium-made rifles. And there was a time where if you got a Belgium-made Browning, it was a big deal. But Browning has the history. But as far as them actually manufacturing their own stuff, I mean, they have a heck of a lineup. They have lever actions nailed down. They got semi-autos nailed down. They've got bolt action nailed down. Center fire, rim fire. They've got a heck of a lineup. And they have to be up there. So I'm going to call them number 5. Right around now, this was so hard when I was trying to figure this out. And I'm sure you guys, at least half of you, are going to disagree, but that's okay. Number 4, Ruger. Now, Ruger is not near as old. Ruger and Weatherby are about the same age. They came out in the 40s. Ruger came out in 1949. So they're not quite as old. They don't have quite the history, but man, they're so solid. I don't know. I can't give one person credit for it all. I don't really know who, but just the company doesn't come out with firearms that are horrible that I know of. It's like they don't come out with as many patents, as many new designs, they don't develop as much, but when they do, it's solid and it's going to be good. Now, they've got tons of cool handguns, but we're not talking about that today. But you think of the Ruger 10, the 10-22. The most famous semi-action 22 of all time. It's got a huge following, huge aftermarket scene. It's just a phenomenal 22. You think about the Mini 14, that's an awesome one. You think about single shots, Ruger number 1. They've been producing it a long time, and it's probably considered one of the best single shots that there is. Now, you can get, some semi-custom $5,000 single shot, but as far as just a standard factory single shot rifle, can you beat the Ruger number 1? And then their take on the, more traditional bolt action rifles, the Model 77, the Hawkeye. It's been around a long time. It's basically very similar to the Winchester Model 70. A little bit different safety, but it's got that Mauser claw extractor. It's their version of the Mauser, basically. It's updated. Solid. When I think of Ruger, I think of solid. And so they've just have a history of just home runs. They just don't strike out. They just do, everything that they do is good. So fast forward to 2022. The two ones that I can think of recently are the Ruger American and the Ruger Precision Rifle. The Precision Rifle is a phenomenal way to get into long-range target shooting if you just want to buy a factory rifle and not make a custom. And the Ruger American is as widely known as, you want to get a gun for $400, it's going to be hard to beat a Ruger American. It's just solid. So it's like you just don't hear of Ruger failing, really. They just do good. They just make good decisions. So I'm going to have to put Ruger at number 4. Number 3. Let's say Marlin. So Marlin started in 1870. And back in the heyday when Winchester was just killing it with their lever action rifles, there was one company that was killing it as well, and was I would say their biggest rival in the late 19th century, the late 1800s, and that would be Marlin. They had, the 1881, 1893, 1894, 1895 lever action rifles that were just fantastic. They were just as good quality as Winchester. Maybe didn't do quite as good on the sales, but just amazing. And staying with lever action, when I think of the greatest 22 lever action of all time, maybe 20 years from now, you might think, well, it's the Henry rifle, the Golden Boy. But historically, I'd say it's the Model 39A. It's just a fantastic stinking, it's built like a tank. That's always been the thing that everyone says about the 39A. It's built like a tank. And they got the Model 25. Whether it's rim fire, lever action, whether it's center fire, black powder, they had it covered. And even today, like most people that shoot a 30-30, it's going to be a 94 Winchester or it's going to be a 336 Marlin. And then Walmart, started selling their 336W, a great seller. So, man, Marlin is just great. I mentioned the Ruger Model 10 was the best, most popular 22 semi-auto of all time. I'd say number 2 would be the Model 60 Marlin. Model 60 Marlin came out in 1982. It's been a stalwart. It's just been there. It's such a great seller. Marlin has had some great selling guns. The 336, the Model 60. The only thing about Marlin, because they've just knocked it out of the park with rim fire, with lever action, they just never really have done much in bolt action. Just never have. I have a bolt action Marlin. It's my 22-250. They come out with the XL7 and the XS7. Didn't last very long, but they've had a few iterations of bolt action rifles that did okay. The history back in the black powder days, And then just the Model 60, semi-auto, and the 336 and the 39A, they've got some of the most iconic lever action rifles of all time. Number 2, I'm sighing because it's like, man, it's so tough. Remington. Remington is the oldest company on here. 1816. Definitely the oldest American company. And we'll just say 1816 to 2020. That's officially was their end. And I know they've been bought out by somebody and they've kind of came back. Of course, the Remington family hasn't owned them in a long time. They've been bought out for a long time. Remington is like FN. You look at the list of rifles that they've developed, designed, manufactured, it's incredible. And the vast majority of them wasn't huge hits. Growing up, I remember the 74, the Remington 7400, I should say. It kind of jammed up unless you kept it clean, but it was a real popular one. I remember the Nylon 66. I owned one of those at one time. A great 22. One thing that they're known for is back in the day, they were one of the companies that built the 1903 A3 Springfield. Did some cool things. The big thing is the Model 700. And they also had the Model 7, but the Model 700 is a lot like the Mark V, but even more iconic, I would say. Even a bigger presence, even a bigger impact. A million iterations of it, just like the Mark V. Probably more iterations of the Model 700 than anything else. In the 60s with that Model 700, it's really when Remington took off. Now, Remington I didn't name off as many, notable rifles with Remington as I did Marlin. But if you want to go back and look at some history, look at the number of rifles that were extremely prolific, extremely productive in their manufacturing and their designing. Just incredible. And we're not talking about cartridges, but they've done phenomenal there too. But that Model 700 is just absolutely great. In the 60s until I'd say the 2000s, they're probably the biggest company in rifle manufacturing. Just number one, mainly because of that 700. Companies have had their heydays, but from the 60s to the 2000s, I'd say Remington was the kings. Now, 20 years from now, if I did this same list, I probably wouldn't have Remington as high, or Marlin, or any, I think some of these will be slipping as time goes on. And you've got some companies that I'll mention here in a second that are coming on the scene hot and heavy fast. And they're going to be moving up this list. But this is just a historic list. But Remington, that Model 700, and some of those other ones, and just the prolific nature of their company, and being the oldest of all of them, got to be number 2. If you know anything about American rifles and rifle companies, then you know who number 1 is. And I will admit I'm a little biased, and I immediately thought this company needed to be number 1. So I really took extra time and really thought about it and looked at their rifles and tried to decide, am I just being biased here, or do they deserve to be number 1? And I kind of thought, yep, number 1, Winchester. Now, you say current lineup in 2022, does Winchester have the best rifles? I would think probably not. Are they the most popular? Not even close, but this is a historic list. So you can go back to before they were called Winchester, when they were the New Haven Arms Company. They had something to do with the Henry rifle from 1860. And then in 1866, they changed their name to the Winchester Company. And they come out with the Yellow Boy, the 1866 Winchester. Then the 1873 Winchester, which is the gun that won the West. The 1876, the bicentennial, or not bi, but the centennial rifle. Teddy Roosevelt liked that rifle. Then they hired a guy by the name of John Browning, and he came out with the 1886 Winchester. Let me just back up. So the 1866 Yellow Boy was kind of based off the Henry, but with some improvements. 1873 was based off the Yellow Boy, but with steel receiver instead of brass. 1876 was just kind of a beefed up, a little bit stronger 1873, the gun that won the West, 1873. John Browning comes in and he wants to develop a Winchester lever action rifle that can withstand the 4570 power. And he develops the 1886, which is a phenomenal, built like a tank Winchester rifle. And then in 1892, he takes that design but scales it down for shooting pistol cartridges, kind of a carbine version of it, calls it the 1892. And that one and the next one I'm getting ready to mention become the two most popular Winchester rifles of all time. And the second one would be the 1894. So a new cartridge was coming on the scene, the first American cartridge to ever have smokeless powder, the 30-30, and he developed the 1894 for that 30-30. And there were some other chamberings later too. Then he developed the 1895, which had a magazine instead of a tube, had a magazine. One of the first ones that ever did that. He also developed the 1890 Pump 22, very early on pump. Now all that was designed by John Browning, but he designed it. Winchester bought the rights, the patent, the royalties from him, and then they manufactured and sold it. So they are Winchester. So only Marlin was back there in those days, really doing anything to compete with them. Remington, of course, was around, but weren't really doing anything notable in the lever action that I'm aware of. They probably had some. So when it comes to lever actions, Winchester and Marlin are the two kings, and I would say Winchester would be number one. But they didn't stop there, so I'm just going to kind of jump around here, but the M1 carbine, Winchester was one of about 5 companies that made the M1 carbine for the military. And then the M1 Garand, Springfield and then Winchester were the only 2 companies that made M1 Garands for the American military. Some other notable ones, there's the Model 100 semi-auto, the Model 88, which was around from 1955 to 1973, was a really cool lever action gun. And one of the cartridges designed for that was the 284 Winchester. It lasted around 20 years. It wasn't the greatest success. Later, the Sako Fenwolf and the Browning BLR kind of copied that Model 88, changed a few things, but the inspiration of the Sako Fenwolf and the Browning BLR came from that Model 88 Winchester. One more lever action you may or may not have heard of is the Model 71. It came out in 1935 and lasted till 1958. It was a lever action rifle, and it was designed around a brand new cartridge called a 348 Winchester. Not the 358, the 348 Winchester. You should do some research sometime on the 348 Winchester. It's the only 34 caliber cartridge that I know of. I'm sure I'm missing one, but that rifle was designed for that cartridge. Like it was a symbiotic relationship, except for maybe some extremely rare one-offs. There was no other caliber chambered for the Model 71. So when you think of the Model 71 and you think of the 348 Winchester, it's the same thing. One rifle, one caliber. And the 348 Winchester was never chambered in any other rifle ever. Just an interesting fact. And the Model 71 was kind of made around the same time as the Model 70. It was kind of made to be a pretty cool duo there, to have a bolt action and a lever action. Speaking of Model 70, let's go back in time to 1925, the Model 54 Winchester. 1925, they developed a new cartridge, the 270 Winchester, and they put it in their new rifle, the Model 54. And the Model 54 was basically kind of a copy of the 1903 Springfield, of course, which was a copy of the Mauser 98. Model 54 was an awesome rifle. And then 11 years later, in 1936, they made it a little bit better, changed a few things on it, and came out with the Model 70. And then from 1936 to 1964 or 63, that was the rifle to own. It was termed the rifleman's rifle. So Winchester has the gun that won the West and the rifleman's rifle. So whether you're talking about lever action or bolt action, they had it covered. What happened in 1964, I'm sure you all know about. We're going to skip that today. But if you have a Model 70 from 1936 to 1963, you have an amazing rifle. So, like I said, Remington from the 60s to about the 2000s were kind of king. Winchester really from like 1860 to 1960 was king. They were king for like 100 years. Now today, FN is making the Model 70s again. I don't know this for a fact, but I think the XPR is made by Browning because it's very similar to the A-Bolt. Winchester is really a shell of itself. Years ago, their ammo division and their rifle division separated, kind of like what Remington has done now. But really none of these companies are what they started at, with the exception of maybe Weatherby and Ruger. I think they might still be owned by the same families. Now, once again, 20 years from now, a lot of these companies will start going down the list. Some new ones will start moving up. But I just cannot see any way you can't put Winchester at number one. Now, you might be thinking about, you might be saying, what about Henry? Okay, Henry's a new company. The Henry of today is not the Henry that developed the 1860 Henry. That was by Winchester and people that were with them. Henry is a new company. However, they're coming on hot and heavy, and they're really becoming a big company. So I think they have a huge future. And if Henry and Tikka and Bergara and Cartridges and Arms and some of these companies continue to produce rifles like they're producing, they're going to be on this list before too long. Now, once again, Tikka is owned by Sako. But there's some great, there's CVA, there's CZ, which has been around a long time. There is some Howa. There's some really good companies. But if some of these new companies continue to produce awesome rifles like they have been, they're going to be on this list. And some of these companies, like Remington, that are just really not doing anything anymore, they're going to eventually start dropping down the list. But that is my list, and it was very hard to pick that. So just to reiterate, number 10, Sako, number 9, Weatherby, number 8, Mauser, number 7, FN, 6, Savage, 5, Browning, 4, Ruger, 3, Marlin, 2, Remington, 1, Winchester. That's my historic list. If you'd like me to, I could do a modern day, go to their website, what's on their website right now, list of the top 10 rifle manufacturers. I could also do a list of the top 10 handgun manufacturers of all time, or the top 10 shotgun manufacturers of all time. I didn't talk about Remington shotguns because it was a rifle video, but there's a lot to talk about with other guns. And I could talk about that if you'd like me to. And if you would like me to, put it in the comments below. But what I really want you to tell me is your top 10. You've heard what I have to say. You've heard the information I've provided. Tell me where I went wrong. Tell me what your top 10 is, or maybe it's your top 5. Or if you think I put one way out of whack and it should have been somewhere else, put it in the comments. Love to read about it. I've enjoyed talking to you, drinking coffee. And until next time, have a great day and take care.